A professional counselor in the Dallas area is growing in popularity for his treatment methods.
How do you talk to kids about terror? And with social media and television, it's everywhere, and it's unavoidable for kids.
Rusty Lozano is the founder of the Center for Biofeedback and Behavior Therapy. He's also been nationally recognized for his work with brain mapping.
He's created a gym to work out the mind. His office features an obstacle course.
Rusty Lozano is a licensed professional counselor, helping children with headaches, with anxiety, ADHD, and more.
Here's where Lozano comes in. He teaches kids how to think their pain away with something called biofeedback.
A North Texas therapist is treating patients in this unconventional way.
We have Rusty Lozano who's joining us today. He's a licensed professional counselor.
We put together an unusual treatment for teenagers who are struggling with mental issues, except he's taking this now a step further.
Rusty Lozano, a leading therapist and pediatric biofeedback therapist based in Texas at the Center for Biofeedback and Behavior Therapy. And Rusty, thanks for being with us tonight.
Rusty Lozano, a father of 4 and also a professional counselor in Texas, says it's all about being a credible resource to your children.
The Therapy Hour with Rusty Lozano, your dedicated resource for mental health news, views, and tips you can use. Brought to you by the Center for Biofeedback and Behavior Therapy in Addison, Texas. And now, here's Rusty.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on the Therapy Hour. I am your host, Rusty Lozano. This show is brought to you by the Center for Biofeedback and Behavior Therapy in Addison, Texas. The Center for Biofeedback and Behavior Therapy is a treatment center focusing on counseling, biofeedback, neurofeedback, and brain mapping. We have a really interesting show today. Let me read you a little bit about this article that I found on the National Institute of Health on learning differences. The National Institute of Health reports that as many as 15 to 20% of Americans are affected by learning disabilities and disorders. In contrast, a major national study found that approximately 5% of children in the United States had learning disabilities. That's pretty astounding. And, you know, it affects people even close to me because I know I myself kind of grew up with some learning. Grew up with learning differences. McCrae, my board operator, actually has a direct connection to this topic and this organization that we're going to discuss today. But let me read a little bit more. It also found on this study, it also found that 4% had both learning disabilities and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. Other research conducted in 2006 estimated that 4.6 million school-aged children in the United States have been diagnosed with learning disabilities. That's pretty astounding. So today we're discussing childhood learning differences, treatment options, tips, and advice for parents, teachers, and for just practical reasons, tips and advice for any individual looking for answers from this organization. It's called the Shelton School in Dallas, and it's actually one of the biggest learning different schools in the United States. And joining us today is Amy Kelton, and let me tell you a little bit about Amy. She is an MED, CALT certified LDT QI. She's the assistant head of early childhood through 5th grade at the Shelton School in Dallas. Welcome to the show, Amy.
Welcome. So happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us. So you've read these results. I mean, you've heard them. I saw you nodding your head, and you know the statistics. I mean, this is a huge population that we're working with.
Absolutely, but I was so glad to hear you articulate it, because I think for the general audience listener, someone who may not be directly affected by learning differences, the statistics speak for themselves. It's not a population that can go ignored any longer. As a matter of fact, before we end this show, I've got to tell you about my friend Samuel, who is a 6th grader in Massachusetts, who shows that no longer is it not something to be ignored, but it's something to wear with a badge of pride about how unique this population is and these individuals who have a learning difference.
Well, and you know, what's interesting is the creativity that a lot of these kids have. I know that I heard that on the movie Avatar, there was actually a Shelton alumni.
Absolutely. He designed the trailer for Avatar. So imagine right now the royalties that he's getting every time that trailer plays.
There's
absolutely. And I was telling McCrae as we entered, because it was kind of one of those, oh my gosh, I remember you from almost 20 years ago when you were at Shelton or whatever. But I was telling McCrae, I was like, we are sitting on a gold mine at Shelton of creative, amazing individuals. So although the show is only an hour, you're going to have to contain me because I could go on and on and on. A lot of information.
McCrae, just to kind of fill you in, McCrae is my board op, and he actually went to the Shelton School in Dallas. And Amy Kelton, she remembered him. She even remembered his last name. Let me talk to you about our 4 segments today, and we'll just jump right in. Our first segment, we're going to define LD. The second segment, we're going to talk about the gifts of dyslexia. The third segment is early warning signs and how to act. And then the fourth is what therapeutic approaches work. So let's jump right in.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about LD.
Absolutely. I think one of the greatest misnomers whenever it comes to neurology, the brain, and its ability to learn information is that reading is not a natural process. Nowhere in our brain will you find one center called the reading center of the brain. You will find that for motor. You'll find it for acquisition of language, but you will not find it for reading, and here's why. Your brain was not designed to acquire written language.
Interesting.
It is. I was going to say, let's give a pregnant pause to that.
Yeah.
We had to adapt. Our brain's neurology adapted in order to acquire written language. It uses 3 different centers of the brain. So when written language came along, whether in hieroglyphics, if it started there, symbols representing events or symbols representing a code or a sound or numeration, our brain had to basically rewire itself to make a match between symbol and associated meaning.
Interesting.
Yes, so a dyslexic basically was just fine until the printing press.
That's when the trouble started.
The trouble, he was
gathering.
ousted at that point.
Yeah.
As soon as reading became the mode or the model for how we acquire information, the dyslexic then was outed. So when you think about it way back when it was the town crier who spread information or hearing things travel from town to town, and then it switched and education became not something just for the upper classes, it became something for the middle and the lower classes, and books became something that were affordable, and then the dyslexic nightmare began.
Yeah, because you think about like the different learning types. There are auditory learners, there are kinesthetic learners, there are visual learners, and so then you have like this one modality, and that can actually be really difficult for people who actually are more hands-on or have to hear like information more and then process it.
Absolutely.
So then you're talking about like processing information visually, and then starting to formulate like 2 words together and the sounds. That can be really difficult. Especially because you have now kids that have language, like different parts of the world, and there are different elements of kids and their IQs and how capable they are to do these things.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's jump into that definition. If now we're going to accept, first of all, that on no developmental milestone chart will you ever see at this age a child will begin to read. And the reason is because it is not something your brain was designed to acquire. We know at age 1 what's going to happen. First steps, first word. We know at the age of 4 months, probably rolling over. Age of 6 months, they're going to be sitting up. All of these motor and language milestones have a developmental chart put to them that no matter if you're in China or if you're in the United States, this is what's going to happen. It's just basic human neurology. But look on a developmental chart and try to find when written language is acquired, and it's one of those that's very muddied because we have to learn it. It has to be directly taught. We need to be exposed to it. So I want to give you a couple little facts about learning differences in dyslexia to spear off of yours. You did a great job of setting us up for it, but I want to tell you this. This is my mission for being here today. Dyslexia and learning differences are identifiable with 92% accuracy at the age of 5.
That's very early.
When do students commonly get diagnosed? 8 and 9 years old.
So you've lost a tremendous window at that point.
You've lost 3 years of opportunity and said 3 years worth of try harder if you just studied more. Look at your friends, they can do it. Rusty, you know, what is 3 years of emotional turmoil going to feel like when you're 8 and 9 and finally getting the answer to what is going on with me?
I mean, a lot of things are set in their ways, and I mean, it comes like ingrained into personality. And
Absolutely. And then you try to get that child willing to come into an educational environment at 8 or 9 and say, I'm here to help you. I'm going to teach you how to learn to read. We're going to get through this together. Most of your groundwork is gaining trust because they've learned 3 years worth of I can't trust my brain.
And being exposed to something that is completely unfathomable to them and difficult. And,
Bingo.
And so then you have, that can then spawn out some of the behavioral issues and
100%.
the anxieties, shutting down in school, performance. It's pretty vast. So, you know, that's it's very telling as far as those statistics. So does that mean that education should start sooner?
Absolutely, but it's early identification and what do we know at 5 that we could be looking for. So to define a learning difference is a child with average to above average intelligence. So we're not struggling with an intellectual disability. Adequate vision and hearing, so it's not a visual acuity issue or a hearing acuity issue. Without a primary emotional disturbance, so there's not an emotional override. But this is a child who has failed or is at risk for failing when exposed to school experiences.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back after these messages.
You're listening to the Therapy Hour with Rusty Lozano, brought to you by the Center for Biofeedback and Behavior Therapy in Addison, Texas.
We're back. If you're just joining us, we're discussing LD and dyslexia with Amy Kelton from the Shelton School in Dallas. Our next segment is going to be about the gifts of dyslexia. What are the gifts, Amy?
Oh, the gifts are many, but part of the reason for the gifts of dyslexia truly is the anatomical differences that we now know are in a brain of those with dyslexia and those without dyslexia. Dr. Gordon Sherman out of Beth Israel Hospital has a brain bank in which those with dyslexia, when they have passed, have willed their brains to science. He has discovered something in examining those brains, which is a term called ectopias, which is neural migration of cells at 6 months gestation, which means in your utero. These cells at 6 months gestation were programmed by DNA to go more into the left hemisphere of the brain, which is the language side of the brain. And guess what? They took a detour and went right.
Oh, interesting. So you're talking about the Wernicke's area, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
That's your reading, writing, and arithmetic?
Absolutely. So when these, the genetic codes signaled for them to go to the left and they went right, what does that mean for a dyslexic? Well, it means that they don't have that same structure on the left side of their brain, which we're going to draw from to read, write, spell, process, and make that connection between visual information and its auditory counterpart. The other thing that he noticed is whenever you do a symmetrical look at the brain, the left and right hemisphere in a typical brain should be asymmetrical in those language areas, the right side smaller. Well, guess what? In a dyslexic, the right side is the same size as the left.
That's interesting.
Which gives us those strengths.
That means that there is more potential there. There's more developed neural pathways.
Absolutely. There's less gray matter on the left side and more on the right. And so there is this symmetry that should not exist. So what does that mean for the dyslexic then whenever you're talking about strengths? Well, it means they're going to have a strength in creativity. These are your writers, your artists, your musicians, your actors, your film directors. They're also going to have strengths in the visuospatial and motor skills, physicians, athletes, surgeons, radiologists. You hear this term often, dyslexic see in 3D. And it's the best way to describe how they have these superhuman capabilities.
Interesting.
How can they just see a brain or a heart like a neurosurgeon or a radiologist and just take it apart and put it back together? As a matter of fact, if you ask a parent of a child with dyslexia, whether their child is young now or their child's older, they will tell stories if this child was always taking everything apart in my house and putting it back together, whether it was the vacuum cleaner or the lawnmower. But here's the funny thing. Usually there were a couple screws left over at the end.
Yeah, I get that. I've been there
couple
before.
Screws left over at the end, but the thing ran still.
Yeah.
These are kids without instructional manuals doing these type of things. And then the other strengths that I see so much are the leadership skills. Yeah. And this out-of-the-box thinking. We should almost thank whatever creator you want to say created the human capacity, because the 20% that we have walking amongst us we need because of their out-of-the-box thinking.
Yeah. And so, what's interesting, this thought came to mind, is that a lot of these kids, there's a stigma behind their, they're labeled as a diagnosis, their disability. But in actuality, what we're talking about are these extra abilities. I mean, these components that, they're miscategorized and misunderstood. So it's a strength and ability that I think that we're misunderstanding with these children.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm so excited because what used to be deniable and not discussable is now undeniable, which is not only the weaknesses but the strengths, but absolutely discussable. Malcolm Gladwell, who is a great author, wrote The Tipping Point, wrote, I can't think of some of his other books. People out there yelling at the microphone, he wrote this and he wrote that, but he wrote one of my favorites, which is his recent book, David and Goliath. And it's the story of the underdog. Why I like this book is there's a chapter, and it's chapter 4, and it's titled, got to read this title to you. It's titled, You Wouldn't Wish Dyslexia on Your Child, or Would You? And it's all about the strengths of dyslexia. Now, why is this cool? When you're picking up a Malcolm Gladwell book, you're not picking it up to learn about learning differences.
Yeah.
You're not picking it up to read about dyslexia. He's dedicated a whole chapter in his book to this underdog potential of basically gratitude we should be paying to this population who really lets us kind of look at that Darwinism idea of natural selection and biodiversity. And thank goodness we're not all the same. And so going back to that strength of out-of-the-box thinking, these are our innovators. Look at those who came before us: Charles Schwab, Henry Ford, Einstein. You could go down the list. Yeah. Thank goodness for Milton Hershey, because he gives us this little thing called a Hershey kiss that we can't live without. These are those
little
people.
Morsels. Yes.
These are those people.
Alexander Bells. So they're all the geniuses, the developers, and the creativity behind really getting things done. What's interesting is I'm thinking about this historical character that Leonardo DiCaprio played when he built that huge airplane, Howard Hughes. Yeah, and how he came up with these just amazing contraptions, and he struggled a lot with a lot of disabilities, and one towards the end was alcoholism and a little bit of schizophrenia. But it makes you think that are we misunderstanding something about the brain and these individuals, that we're trying to fit all these kids into round holes when they may be squares and stars?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just so glad now that neurology and functional MRI and research has caught up with what back in the 1870s was first discovered. There was this knowledge of, here's someone with intellectual potential, but when exposed to reading and writing, they're struggling. What is this? So now we have the neurology and all the science to back it up. And for this population, they're no longer having to hear, well, you just need to try harder, because it's not a try harder issue. Some of the neat things that whenever we think not just about the gifts of dyslexia, but what we know based upon functional MRIs is there is a woman named Dr. Guinevere Eden out of Georgetown. And she has taken functional MRIs of a dyslexic prior to reading therapy or reading remediation, then did touch points of that same functional MRI throughout their reading remediation. And what she found was incredible. Basically, what I'm looking at you preaching to the choir here, our brains have a lot of plasticity. They can compensate for areas that are dysfunctional and reroute and build new neural pathways. So that's basically what she found is our brains have this malleable ability to overcome what it was not wired to achieve and pull on some strength. So,
and that psychoneuroplasticity is there's no set time limit on that. We have it throughout our entire lives.
Bingo.
And so you have these people that are kind of getting older in population, and they do puzzles and they keep their brain active, and so then they continue to develop and grow new neural pathways that keeps the brain healthy. They've even found studies that have shown the slow onset of Alzheimer's and how just keeping the brain active keeps these people intact. And it's amazing when you think about, from what I understood about knowledge, you had a window. I was always told, and everything that I've read prior to like my master's studies was that, learning, you had, I guess, an age of about 7 to 11 years old.
Yep.
And if you're going to expose your child to a new language, you had to do it before the age of 7. And so they have like trillions of these neural pathways. And as you stimulate sounds, different languages, textures, then you strengthen these neural pathways. But if you don't use them, then they disconnect. So that potential is then lost.
Yep.
But that's not the case. In fact, like you can continue to do this throughout your entire life is what we're discussing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, I have to out myself. I'm also a Montessorian, so all you Montessorians out there, hey. And what we know in our Montessori training is there's something called sensitive periods, basically optimum times in which to be exposed to different stimulus. Okay, yes. So at an optimum period, exposed to the stimulus, you are going to develop that knowledge or that information much, much faster. But going and bridging to your point, it doesn't mean you'll never acquire it. It just will not be within your wheelhouse at that time, and it may take you a little bit longer or more repetitions in order to acquire that information. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I want to make sure to point out about dyslexia, I want to go back to that broad umbrella of learning differences. Learning differences have a lot of different categories, dyslexia being one of them. ADHD is also considered a learning difference. Not only does it have its phenotype or its behavioral profile, but it has an academic profile too. These are kiddos who have a strength actually in reading. They can decode, but their weakness is going to be in comprehension, remembering what they read, extrapolating or drawing conclusions, making inferences, processing that information. Math disability dyscalculia falls under the umbrella of a learning difference. Written expression disability falls under a learning difference. Oral language disorders, motor coordination disorders all fall under that umbrella of a learning difference. Now, here's something that I really want to make sure statistically gets out there. There is a 70% comorbidity rate between dyslexia and other specific learning differences, which means 30% is your pure dyslexic. The other 70% is going to have these comorbidities of ADHD, math issues, written expression issues, things of that nature.
And so some symptoms actually may present themselves more than dyslexia. And so we pay attention to those first, not knowing that maybe we're overlooking something else. So miscategorization, do you see that a lot? Do you see kids that are misdiagnosed?
Yes and no. I think I will like to say it as misguided. The parents are misguided, and the idea of it's just developmental and you can wait. We do see misdiagnoses with ADHD, but I'm going to put that in the realm of a premature delivery of a curriculum, which is happening now in our schools. We're demanding way too much that is developmentally inappropriate.
A lot of stress on these kids. We'll be right back after these messages.
You're listening to the Therapy Hour with Rusty Lozano, brought to you by the Center for Biofeedback and Behavior Therapy in Addison, Texas.
We're back. If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Amy Kelton from the Shelton School in Dallas, discussing LD and dyslexia. And, over the commercial break, McCrae chimed in and mentioned to Amy that she's hitting on a lot of really good points. And this is something that he struggled with himself. But you have your own story about an individual that has really touched your life.
Absolutely. And I can't help but smile. And I'm smiling at you. And I probably look like one of those weird people just so happy. But I recently went to a suburb of Boston, Massachusetts. I travel a lot across the country and then internationally doing teacher training, because one of our missions at Shelton is do not contain ourselves or try to kind of hold tight to all of our methodologies. One of our things is outreach as many individuals, teachers, students, parents we can help, the better. So I was recently in this suburb and I was training the teachers, and I took a tour through the classrooms and met some of the students. It was a Montessori school up there. I get an email a couple months later from a 6th grade student named Samuel Burns. And he said, I'd love to interview you because for my capstone project this year, I am going to be writing a paper and presenting it on the gifts of dyslexia. And so I was, obviously very complimented that he wanted to interview me. So we go into this interview and he has some questions for me. And one of the questions was, what do you see as the most common personality traits in these students? And I said, oh my gosh, their humor is incredible. Their perseverance. And the second I said perseverance, he fist pumps up in the air and goes, yeah, I've got that. And I said, and then they're very insightful. They can read a situation very well. And just to see this 6th grade boy champion himself and is ready to propagate the message about his gifts to his peers in his classroom, to anyone he comes across. Where would we have been 30 years ago? That never would have happened. So, boy, that Virginia Slim saying, you come a long way, baby. We really, really have. The interesting thing is he asked me this question. Two other questions I got to share with you. He said, is there anything about dyslexia or learning differences that you think everyone should know? And I said, yes. There was a quote in Time magazine over the summer that I read and just encapsulates this population, or just a life message, which is different does not mean worse. Different does not mean worse. If we can employ that to every time we meet someone who's a little bit different or has a different thought than we do, it doesn't mean worse, it just means different.
But you know what it also takes is it takes people like you. It takes somebody to discover these kids and create like a safe environment and let them know that it's okay to become themselves and discover themselves and own what they have.
Absolutely. To be self-actualized. It's what Socrates said, know thyself and thy will be wise. Be self-actualized. Yeah. He did ask me, he said, who is your favorite dyslexic? Because he said his is Harrison Ford, and I said, oh, I'm taking that's from Star Wars and not Raiders of the Lost Ark. My generation would be Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah. And he said, yes. And I said, you know what? I don't have one. Anyone who acknowledges their dyslexia, works within the boundaries of what their weaknesses are going to be, but stands up for their dyslexia, uses their gifts, those are my favorite dyslexics, the ones who embrace it. So he wrote me this thank you note. I have to read it because this show is dedicated to all the Samuels out there. He said, thank you so much.
That's a big so.
That was a big so. For your help with my capstone project. You were so enthusiastic and helpful. I just wanted to hug you. And he said, signed, one of your favorite dyslexics. Because Samuel embraces it. He's living it. He is not shying away from it. He's not tucking it in the corner. He's not embarrassed. He has no right to be, no reason to be.
That's phenomenal. That's very heart-touching because, kids at that age, how old is Sam? He's 16.
6th grade, so he's probably, 11?
Yeah, I mean, you would never think that the kids have that type of insight. But think about, now moving forward, how just having an open mindset about it is going to change his life and how he's going to apply his own speculations and ideas into things that he encounters. And he's going to make it his own. Instead of trying to force the note and try to conform and change and be more like the others, he's going to grow and develop into one of these amazing,
absolutely,
free-spirited characters who can think outside the box and maybe do some great things in his life.
Absolutely, absolutely. He goes forth
Certainly
with a lot of confidence.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm glad we shared that. I know we wanted to segue into the early warning signs.
Early warning signs and how to act.
Okay, this is great. This is going to be your key. Go ahead and hold up 4 fingers, and as I tick them off, count them.
Mm-hmm.
It's called CLAP: coordination, language, attention, and perception. You can see the early warning signs starting way back in the 1 to 3 year old range, because what's developing at first year to third year? Coordination and language.
Yes.
When those 2 things are developmentally delayed, that is when you know you need to get help. So who would you go to? You would go to an occupational therapist for the motor skills.
Mm-hmm.
You would go to a speech language therapist for the speech language skills. These are the underpinnings of what is going to be constitutional, which is a learning difference later. Attention. Attention's a really funny one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what we know about the brain is between 2.5 and 3 years old, the brain moves from being completely sensory, which is, if you think about a child from birth to 3, they're putting everything in their mouth, they're touching everything.
Right.
They basically don't have filters in place.
Yeah, that's the Piagetian model.
Absolutely. It's called, the absorbent mind by Montessori, or the sensory motor pre-operational child by Piaget.
Yes.
So what happens then is, why are we as adults not putting things in our mouth that shouldn't go there, right, people, or feeling around? Well, it's because our brain pruned off unnecessary impulses that cause us to want to reach and grab and put everything in our mouth. And so for the first time around 3 years old, we're able to inhibit sensory information. We're able to pay attention to the person in front of us versus all the background noise or things going by. It's a beginning of a development of that attention center of the brain.
Mm-hmm. I can kind of sort through.
Absolutely. High demand
information
versus, what I shouldn't be doing. Things of that nature.
So that's where you kind of come in and you integrate things like social skills and maybe counseling and do some early intervention with kids, learning to put their feelings into words and kind of express themselves, so they don't just grab or point or smack when they don't agree.
Absolutely.
So integrating things like those social integration, social skills, being able to kind of verbalize that ability to get your needs met, that's super pivotal.
Absolutely. And then going to the P perception, you're going to see this whenever it comes to one of the phenotypes of a child who's going to be at risk for dyslexia, is they're going to have difficulty with something called phonological awareness, which is the ability to perceive human speech sounds in the correct order. So it's not a hearing issue, it's an auditory perception issue. So you'll see them struggle with things like rhyming or patterning, with things like, if I said balloon and asked you to take out the oon, what word would I have?
Ball.
You would have ball. Balloon, take out the oon, you would have ball.
Words. You know what that reminds me of? You remember on Sesame Street where they had the two shadow faces, and it would each add a different part to the word? It's exactly what we're talking about here, right?
Absolutely. So from this, I just said to you, 92% accuracy can be diagnosed by the age of 5.5 and 6 because of CLAP. If there's delays in coordination, language, attention, perception, especially when it comes to that phonological awareness, the ability to rhyme, the ability to segment human speech sounds. Just take the word cat. Can you say k, at, and perceive there's 3 distinct sounds? Those at risk for dyslexia are going to have difficulty with that. Now, it doesn't mean that you're going to have all 4 things. You could have 1, you could have 2, you could have a myriad of, this one's a little bit more severe than this one. You could have all 4. Montessorians, I call to you out there. Y'all are our boots on the ground whenever it comes to teachers of young children. There's a 3 to 6-year-old Montessori curriculum called Sensorial that really, really can hone in and pin out all 4 of those things in CLAP because of the way that the materials are presented. And Montessorians are great observers and they can see it. But as a parent, to know those things, to know, hey, why wait? Even if someone says it's developmental, why wait? What's the risk? What's the risk in just going now to seek out help. There is no risk.
Yeah, it really
There's
isn't.
no risk.
I mean, it's early intervention, and better safe than sorry.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I want to read to you a statistic right now because I'm all about this. Of the children who display reading problems in the first grade, so first grade is about a 6-year-old child, maybe 7. Of these children who already displayed reading problems in the first grade, 74% will be poor readers in the 9th grade and into adulthood unless they received informed and explicit instruction on phonological or phonemic awareness. Children will not mature out of their reading difficulties. So to say they'll catch up is a misnomer. It's bad advice. Phonological awareness and that training can begin very, very early.
Interesting. Talking with Amy Kelton from the Shelton School. We're going to take a commercial break. We'll be right back after these messages.
You're listening to the Therapy Hour with Rusty Lozano, brought to you by the Center for Biofeedback and Behavior Therapy in Addison, Texas.
We are back, and if you're just joining us, we're discussing LD and dyslexia with Amy Kelton from the Shelton School in Dallas, Texas. Amy, over the break, you actually held up these cool books. Do you want to share those with the listeners?
Yes. And this is, once again, one of those bridges of thank goodness we're living today with an open acknowledgement of learning differences and their gifts. I went recently to the International Dyslexia Association annual conference. We were lucky to have it here hosted in Dallas. And I picked up a couple of books that are new. They are written for young children, 5, 6 years old and older, and they're called I Have Dyslexia. And it's a picture book that explains and sits down and explains to the child all about their brain and how it just processes information differently, and that different does not mean worse. It's just different, and can really help send that level of, first of all, acknowledgement. So instead of leaving someone in the dark about why can't I, explaining and putting a label to it, owning it and saying, here's what's going to be tough for you, but here's what your gifts are. So there's one, it's cute. The blue one's for the boy and the pink one's for the girl.
That's neat.
And then I love this one. As a matter of fact, it's been checked out many times to parents at our school. It's called A Walk in the Rain with a Brain. And it was written by Dr. Edward Hollowell out of Harvard University, who's a leading expert in ADHD.
Nice.
And it's a book that explains ADHD to children. It was written with his children who also struggle with ADHD. So it's co-authored by them. And once again, it takes that look at neurology and what you think about your brain, how you can make it work for you, but what your struggles are going to be. And this last one is by a neurologist named
That one is really neat.
Oh, this is great. It's written by a neurologist named Dr. Joanne Deek, and it's called Your Fantastic Elastic Brain, How to Stretch It and How to Shape It. And it takes a look at the brain and explains what the amygdala is responsible for, what the prefrontal cortex is responsible for, what the cerebrum is responsible for, the hippocampus. What I love is explaining all of this cool neurology to children.
And it's actually really animated and colorful.
Absolutely.
I'm going to post these books on our Facebook page, guys, so you can actually look at them there. I'll take a picture of them before we leave. And, And so, you'll be able to kind of find those. But that's a truly amazing resource you have there.
Well, yeah, and parents ask me all the time, how do I explain it? What should I say? Is my child ready to hear it? Well, let me tell you, the second your child walks into a normalized education environment, whether that's at 3 years old, 4, 5, or 6, and meets with failure while others succeed, they know something is not right. They need you to embrace it from the get-go. I know Samuel Burns, my friend in Boston, Mass., would not be who he is as an 11-year-old boy had his parents not embraced it. and talk to them about it very openly from the get-go, because they know and they need to know that they are bright. They have to be.
Yeah.
It's the categorization
Well, I mean,
is average to above average intelligence.
They
You
start
have to be bright.
comparing themselves, and then they'll just chisel themselves apart.
You got it. So once again, 92% accuracy between 5.5 and 6 years old to diagnose a learning difference. Why wait till 8 or 9?
Super important early intervention. Well, our last segment is what therapeutic approaches work. So let's talk a little bit about those. And you also wanted to discuss some electronic assisted therapy.
Oh, yes. Okay, so what we know works is direct, explicit instruction in multisensory, structured language approaches. These are reading programs written specifically to remediate written language disorders. If you struggle with any weakness in reading, comprehension, spelling, or written expression, these are the programs that are going to remediate you. So it's not just for dyslexia. It's also ADHD has difficulty with that reading comprehension component. The longitudinal data indicates that systematic phonics instruction, which is one of these MSL programs, results in more favorable outcomes for individuals. The instruction by these expert teachers, you have to be trained. So, Rusty, when you read all my credentials, I wanted you to read that specific one called CALT and LDT, because to get these licensures in these reading remediation programs, you have to go through the training. This isn't a weekend course. This is 2 years worth of coursework. So please, as parents, when you're thinking about getting your child evaluated and then finding that right match, make sure there's someone who has one of the accredited reading or remediation programs. You can get a list of these programs on a website called imslic.org, which is IMSLEC.org. This is a program that accredits reading remediation. This is a organization that accredits reading remediation programs. Here's why. In every field there's charlatans out there. How do you know which one's the quality versus the one who is just trying to make a buck or doesn't have data? To be one of these programs accredited by them, you have to put in the longitudinal study and the rigorous process they want you to go through. So this is a great resource for parents. Another great resource for parents is decodingdyslexia.org. Decoding Dyslexia has chapters all across the United States in the different states. We have different local chapters here, one in Keller, one in Plano, the Dallas area, and it's a great parent portal for you. But most importantly, if you're wanting to get your child help, it's seeking out an evaluation. You can do an evaluation on a 5-year-old, and you would be really looking at those speech language areas and what's called that early literacy skills of phonological awareness. You get with a speech language therapist for that language part, an occupational therapist for any weakness in the motor system, both gross motor and fine motor. And then tap into your resources around you. That's why I mentioned the Decoding Dyslexia website, the IMSLIC website. International Dyslexia Association has a website. There's a chapter in every state and in every city. We have a wonderful chapter here in Dallas. And I want to give kudos out to Dallas. Dallas is among one of the few metropolitan areas that have an amazing plethora of schools just targeting specific areas of academic weaknesses, whether it's in the autistic spectrum realm or whether it's in intellectual disabilities. We have numerous schools that are serving children with learning differences in our own area. Shelton is not the only one in the game. There are many, many ones. So talk about an abundance of resources around you. The other thing that you could do just as a parent, not just reading these books and bringing some acknowledgement, but remember that for every piece of learning that's going to be acquired, it's very hard fought. Because we know neurologically this disorder is of constitutional origin. It's a neurological disorder, so their brains are wired a little bit differently. So one of the things we do is we reduce tasks into smaller segments. If you're in the special ed field, you may have heard of something called task analysis, that when you want to achieve a certain goal, write out the steps, every single sub-step it would take to achieve a certain goal, because you need to go back and reduce everything to smaller segments. It's amazing in that the second you break down what could be a 3-step lesson into taking the first step and breaking it into maybe 5 small sub-steps, so that you're not having the brain assume information, they're walking through the process, all of a sudden the student goes, oh, that's all it was? That was easy.
Yeah, it's explained differently.
Explain differently. Reduce those tasks into smaller segments. Show, touch, and feel the similarities. When I said that these were multi-sensory structured language education models of reading, it's because we're not just using visual auditory, because those centers we know are going to be blocked.
Tactile.
It's going to be use every sense to you. That's why shout out to my Montessorians. The Montessori method is very tactile. So show and feel and touch the similarities. One of the things that we use at Shelton is something called a movable alphabet. So you can feel the difference between the shape of a T that says T and the shape of an F that says F. When you feel the differences in those shapes, it's going to help that visual system perceive the difference, because now we can tactily feel it. Another thing is use short rhythmic phrases in oral language. The hardest thing for parents and teachers is we're very loquacious. We talk, and you know this as a counselor.
Yes.
Make your words mean something.
Right.
Don't just keep talking. What you're going to say, make sure it has meaning. If you want them to go to their room and clean it up, break it down into 3 steps and say, go to your room, get your socks, come back. Let's repeat those. Go to your room, get your socks, come back. Hold up those 3 fingers and now go. Because you know they'll go to their room and they'll see their toys.
See
and
a
they'll pull
ball,
up.
and they end up playing. So in
See
short and
their
sweet,
ball.
very 3
Absolutely.
steps.
I know I wanted to talk about technology. So the printing press, that invention of technology, was the Achilles heel and the outing of the dyslexic. Thank goodness for technology today. So we kind of are coming 180. Technology is an amazing facilitator for
It's very fast.
for the dyslexic or for a student who struggles with any form of academics, reading, writing, spelling. We have Speakin' right now, where you can speak into the computer and it can type for you. We have things where you can use a highlighter, a special highlighter on a book, and have the text highlighted so it can read it back to you. So technology of the printing press outed the dyslexic. Technology now, almost 200 years later, is kind of the panacea, or the thing that...
And so it's now adaptive, and so it's helping us.
It is.
So it's no longer trying to figure this out with a bunch of words, but now these assistive components are drawing in on other processing centers of the brain.
I'm like a kid on Christmas. I don't want it to be over, Rusty.
Yeah, I know. Our time runs really short.
We've unwrapped the presents, but I
Yes.
want to have more.
Well, Amy, I really enjoyed having you on the show. Follow us on Facebook at the Center for Biofeedback and Behavior Therapy, and on Twitter at Rusty Lozano. We've been speaking with Amy Kelton from Shelton School. Thank you so very, very much for coming and joining us.
Thank you so much for listening in today.
You guys have a great weekend. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.